Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tom Foster. I'll be your moderator today, and we're going to start the program in approximately 1 minute. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As I said, my name is Tom Foster. I'll be your moderator today. But before we start, I'd like to turn the program over and give some welcome remarks to Fred Barnstein. Fred is the CEO and founder of TROW, TPSU, and 401k TV. So, Fred, I'll turn it over to you for a moment and for your introductory comments.
Great. Thank you, Tom, and welcome to everyone to our weekly virtual town hall. We're holding it every Friday at 1 o'clock, trying to have some consistency here. And we're just trying to do this for our clients, the TPSU primarily. So you have a way every week to just touch base and from a independent third party, get some information and also to be productive. We've changed the format a little bit, or the direction, starting with this week, to focus, number one, on the role of the retirement committee. We do a lot of education and training around the retirement committee. And so we want to focus all the different issues around how should your retirement committee, if you have one, is reacting and dealing with all the different issues. Today will be an overall general review of the role of the committee during this crisis. But the other thing that we're doing is we're going to be offering up to 4 hours of continuing education credits for plan sponsors. You would get an hour. Right now it's with SHRM, and we're hoping in the next week or two to get HRCI as well for listening in. But then we also have on our on the TPSU Learning Management System, 3 online courses, TPSU Retirement Committee Education, and each of those courses offer an hour of CE. So with this and the courses that you can take, you can get up to 4 hours of continuing education, and there'll be more information sent to you for everyone who's registered for all plan sponsors on how you would get access to those courses and be qualified for the continuing education. For those of the plan sponsors that complete the retirement committee education, there's a certificate of completion that you can use and put in your fiduciary file to show that you have gotten educated on running the committee, which is getting important for the regulator. So that's a little bit of a difference. So with that, I am going to turn the program back over to Tom and to our panelists. And the focus this week is going to be on the role of the committee during this COVID-19 crisis. Next week, we're going to be focused on how committees should be leveraging their plan advisor during this crisis and what they can do for you. And in succeeding weeks, we're looking at reviewing target date. This is a really good time to be looking at your target date strategies given the market downturn, and also reviewing how active funds versus index funds have done. So with this week, it is general overview on the role of the committee during the crisis. And with that, Tom, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Fred. First of all, as Fred mentioned, this program is approved for 1 hour of CE credit through SHRM. And what we ask you to do is, if you're interested in receiving this credit, please stay on after the call for 1 minute, and then Steph or DJ will come on and give you a code necessary to fulfill that 1 hour credit. So we ask you to please do that. Also, as we're going through this call today, there will be no live questions because of the time, but what we're going to ask you to do, if you do have a question, type it in, and then Steph will go through those questions and ask them appropriately throughout the course of the program. And speaking of our panelists for today, first of all, we have Cherie Knowles. She is the founder and chief retirement officer of HR Knowledge Source from Atlanta, Georgia. We next have Michael Ola, and he's the director of Plan Solutions at One America in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then finally, Ty Parrish, the partner and practice leader at Serenity Partners, and it's based in Tampa, Florida. So those are our panelists. We'll be going back to them for specific questions in just a moment. But let's first of all, let's review what we've done. As Fred said, this is part of a series of ongoing virtual town hall meetings. And I first of all want to give you sort of an overview of what we've done previously. We started this series back in March, on March 20th to be exact. And on that program, the CARES Act had yet to pass. So we talked to 3 advisors who were, in the trenches every day dealing with plan sponsors, with participants in customer questions. We had Daniel Bryant from Hubbard National. We had Chris Thixton from Pension Consultants, and also Cameron Jones from NFP. Their comments were primarily around what they were doing prior to the implementation of the CARES Act and communicating with their clients. We had some discussion around that. We also talked about how you segment your messaging around different generations, the Gen X, Gen Y, baby boomers, and millennials. And then we also talked, which I think is an issue that's really affecting all of you, in that, what about liquidity during this crisis? Do we access our retirement plan or not? And what are the pros and cons that surround that? So that was the basis of our first town hall. On March 27th, and that date should resound for all of you, because that was the date the CARES Act actually passed. And during the course of our discussion, the bill actually passed. Prior to going into the call, there was some discussion as to whether or not it would actually pass, because there was one holdout from a representative. But it did pass. And so on that call, we had some of the industry experts. We had Chris Gaston, who was a senior policy director at Davis and Harmon, a lobbyist in Washington. We had one of his partners, Michael Hadley, who was a partner in Davis and Harriman. We also had Glenn Spencer from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Peg Knox, who represented DCEA, which is a trade organization that represents 185 members. On that call, first of all, we talked about with Mike, and he talked about some of the passages of the bill and what some of the provisions were. We talked to Chris, and Chris actually brought us up to date on the process of how this all came together and how one person could potentially stop this from going forward, but it did pass. We talked to Glenn Spencer, as I said, and he talked to us about what they were doing for their members as part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And he talked specifically about the new paid sick leave and FMLA. And then finally, we had Peg Knox from DCEA, and she talked about some of the things that they were doing with their members across the country and how they were communicating. Last week, we had 3 members on our panel. We had Kimberly Prescott, who is an HR specialist. We had Joe Brummel, a advisor, and John Doyle, who was representing Capital Group and American Funds. In that discussion, we talked about furloughs and layoffs and how they were different and how they applied. We also talked about some of the ways that now that the bill has passed, how these advisors were communicating with their clients. And then we also talked, and Fred mentioned in upcoming weeks, we're going to talk about target date funds. John Doyle from American Funds talked about target date funds and some of the fiduciary responsibilities surrounding that. So it's been a pretty well-rounded panel, and I think we have the same thing for us today. And so as we start this discussion, remember, if you want to ask a question, merely go on. You'll have the ability to ask a question right online. So let's get right into it. Now, Sherry, we're all going through this new experience every day, and as it relates to managing through current crisis. And Sherry, you have vast experience as evidenced by the growth and success of your firm. You have had national, regional, and local HR experience across the United States. You have served as a retirement plan committee member. You have served as a vice president of human resources for a $1 billion professional service firm. And your HR industry experience includes professional service firms, insurance, technology, education, automotive, supply chain management, and logistics. Your experience and your leadership contribute to your currently serving on the board of directors for the National Association of Afro-American Human Resources. So as we face this crisis, my question for you, Sherry, is what are your clients concentrating on? How are those employers prioritizing their channels? And then more significantly, how are you assisting your consulting clients as they prioritize working through the multiple of challenges that they're now faced with?
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everyone. You know, it's an interesting question because I think a lot of employers are essentially in the same boat. We're all trying to figure out how to stay afloat how to write things out, how to deal with the current crises short term, but also thinking about what happens in 3 months or 6 months and 9 months. And so people are in that space of trying to figure out what normal looks like today, but also what the normal will look like once we come out of this. What we're seeing is that there are really two camps right now. One are the employers who've had to make the very tough decisions of laying people off already, and they're really thinking about how do we bring people back, when do we bring them back, and what will that look like? The other category of employers still have people that are employed, and whether they're essential workers who are going into a location or working from home, the things that they're thinking about top of mind is, how do I reduce cost? So how do I think about my expenses in a different way while I'm still encouraging and increasing employee engagement? How do I mitigate any distractions or productivity issues that may arise because of the pandemic? And they're also really taking a look at their retirement plans. And I know our theme is the role of our employment retirement committees. One of the areas that they're really thinking about right now is what do we do perhaps with our 401k match, our employer contributions? Do we keep things steady? Do we move in a different direction? And if we stop them or suspend them, what's the impact? So those are things that I think are really top of mind right now for employers across the country. And in our firm, we've been able to really help them from a variety of perspectives in terms of consulting support. One is reviewing their budgets. So looking at the HR spend in particular, maybe they need to make adjustments in terms of training or other areas that they may not normally look at. They're also looking at salary. To be quite frank, we're helping them think through how do you or can you make adjustments to salaries without laying people off. And so one example could be maybe people take a voluntary unpaid day. So those are examples of ways to help them think through maybe even a 20% reduction in their overall salary budget. They're also thinking about policies and what types of policies may need to be put in place going forward in this new post-pandemic normal. Telecommuting. That has been a high topic of discussion amongst clients and employers around the world, really. I don't know if you read this or saw this, Tom, but the CEO of Verizon just had a comment around they have 150,000 people working from home, and these are jobs that no one even fathomed could be done from home, and people are doing it well. So how do you bring people back into the workspace, and what does that look like? So those are things that are top of mind. I would also say we're helping them really think through how they might use, you mentioned the CARES Act, how they might use the Paycheck Protection Program loans or the EIDL loan from the SBA. And in the event that they can use those monies to maintain or sustain payroll for the month of May and month of June, what happens after that? So if you bring people back, do you have to lay them off? Or if you currently have people employed, how do you sustain that? So those are just some examples of the things we're talking about with them and trying to help them really think through longer term. The last thing that I'll mention, Tom, when we think about this post-pandemic new normal, how are people, the employees, going to feel when they're back in the workplace? Are we going to see an uptick in uncivil behavior or an uptick in PTSD? A lot of times we think about post-traumatic stress syndrome as something that happens from a military perspective, but people are experiencing trauma right now. There's a lot of high anxiety and stress. And so how do we make sure we put mechanisms in place to help them as they return back to the workforce or continue in the workforce? Then the last thing that I'll mention is what I'm coining right now, COVID bias. For people who have tested positive and have recovered from COVID-19, are we going to see an uptick in just unconscious and conscious bias around that from the other employees who haven't had it, right? So thinking about treatment of others is also something top of mind. And I'd say for our retirement committee members, you play a significant role in what the reshaping will look like. It's been mentioned in terms of the plan design itself, but also people who may be in a fear-based state wanting to take distribution. So how do you help manage that, and how do you communicate? So those are questions that are top of mind for our clients, but what we're seeing just in trends in general.
Right. Well, you mentioned something very important, Sheree, and I think not only are persons going through financial crisis right now, but they're also going through emotional crisis. And you mentioned something, I'd like to see if we get a little more input from you. What are some words of encouragement or concerns that you feel such retirement committee members should be communicating during these uncertain times?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing is transparency is key. It's critical. So as retirement committees are making, having tough conversations and making tough decisions potentially, being sure that you are communicating frequently and that you are as transparent as possible. Understanding, and I mentioned this, that people may be, employees may be in a fear-based state. And when they're looking at the economy, they're looking at their portfolios and the performance of those portfolios investments. They may want to take their money out. They may want to reallocate. And so just understanding that those questions are as a result of us just being in an extremely volatile situation, and having empathy, but also serving as a subject matter expert. This is what you do, and this is your lane. And so people are going to be looking to tap into that expertise. Great.
And also, Sheree, I think that in terms of communicating with your various participants, do you think it's important to communicate to them in terms of their generation? I mean, would you communicate differently to millennials than you would to Gen X or Gen Y or to baby boomers?
So in an ideal world, I would say absolutely. But people need communication fast and furious, right? So being able to have a communication that covers what we anticipate the needs or interests would be of each generation, you could put that in one communication. And then how you distribute it, perhaps you're doing something, and I'm just giving examples off the top of my head, but maybe a weekly huddle, or maybe something that is in writing that is quick, like a micro burst of communication, but doing it more frequently, I think would be helpful.
Great. And also, you said you would sort of communicate in one communication, but don't you think it would be important that if you have a group of, let's say, baby boomers that are close to retirement, that they should be communicated a little bit differently because they don't have the time to wait out this storm? So would you pick specific groups in that instance to communicate differently to them, especially when they're getting close to retirement?
Yes, and so part of what I believe employment or retirement committees are doing right now, and probably have been doing this really well, Tom, is thinking about the key stakeholders. So to your point, a key stakeholder are the baby boomers who, especially if they have target dated funds and they're really thinking about what happens to me in 5 years, what happens to me in 3 years, like I need to make some decisions now. I do believe that a specific focus should be on that group. Additionally, to your point about millennials, just to be frank, some millennials aren't even thinking about retirement at this point, right? And they may be the ones that are more fear-based in terms of, well, let me do something different with my retirement or my contributions right now. And so being able to allay fear at all of those different levels would be incredibly important.
Great, thank you very much. So why don't we go to our first poll question, because I think this fits in very perfectly what you have just mentioned. So if we could throw up our first poll, DJ. And I think this is important for everybody to focus on. For those plan sponsors and committee members that are looking at this right now, have you reduced the employer match? Have you eliminated, or there's no change at all? So we'll give you a minute to do that. And in the meantime, Steph, do we have any questions from the audience that we'd like to address?
Yes, Tom, we do. And the first question is actually for Cherie, and it is relative to accessing emergency funds. And this is coming from a company that is a smaller employer. And they're interested in, is there a good source or a good checklist available for smaller employees that may not have the ability to tap into legal expertise right away, but a checklist that addresses the pecking order or the process one would go through for accessing the emergency funds available through the government and other sources?
Absolutely. So the Small Business Development Center, or SBDC, has great information and great resources for the smaller businesses to really start to think through that. We've been working with them along with the Georgia location of the SBA with some other smaller companies thinking about just that. So once you receive this emergency fund, the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, how do you prioritize the spend? And the other question that's coming up, and there are resources for that, what happens if you don't get it? I'm sure most of us are tracking in the news, and as of the end of day yesterday, the funds have been exhausted. So if you are a small employer and either A, you didn't apply soon enough, or B, you're getting turned down, what do you do next? So yes, there are absolute resources out there, and we can certainly help guide and point you in the right direction.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Cherie. And DJ, can we see the results of the poll? Okay, no change at all. Now I'll ask some of the panelists, does that surprise you, Michael, that there's no change at all? Or do you think it's just too early into the game to really make any decisions right now, considering everybody's worrying about how they're going to pay their next bill and mortgage payments and whatnot? What are your thoughts on that, Michael?
You know, it doesn't actually surprise me at all. Our experience is very similar. We had a lot of inquiries about how would you do that and whatnot. And we've seen very little activity on that. I think most of our clients are taking a much more measured approach. This is not something that they can just, that the decision is irrevocable. They can always make this decision down the road, but they are taking that kind of wait and see approach and looking at all those other alternatives. So it does not really surprise me at all.
Yeah, nor does it surprise me. And that's sort of the response I've gotten from many plan sponsors and advisors as we've continued doing these virtual town halls. So Michael, speaking of you, you're an industry professional. You've managed an entire team of experienced professionals at One America. You and your team provide responses and solutions to complex ERISA and tax-based questions for corporations, nonprofit, and government-sponsored plans. That's what you did up until the first quarter of 2020. But as 2020 began, Michael, you and your team started addressing and implementing the language that we know as the Secure Act. And then shortly after that first quarter, you and your team have now introduced the CARES Act. Although retirement plan design, documentation, administrative process, and fiduciary governance are still high priorities, the CARE Act has an impractical, really hasn't, I'm sorry, the CARE Act has impacted what you and your team do every day. And so knowing that there has been provisions which remove some of the barriers in assessing your retirement savings, what are the intermediate and long-term ramifications of using retirement monies? And I get that question all the time, Michael, such as emergency funds, loans from the plan. What are your thoughts about that? And what should retirement committees be thinking about as these funds are accessed by the participants, or asked to be accessed by the participants?
Well, thanks, Tom. To answer the premise of the question first, I can tell you that my team is really not doing anything differently than what they had been doing previously. Maybe the pace has picked up just a little bit. And the reason for that is because One America is really all about relationships. We truly take our role with our clients as being one of partnering with them. And that's what we've been doing all along. The subject matter changes and sometimes the pace of the activity changes. But that is the role we're taking. And to give you a little bit of our take on how we should approach this with our clients with respect to the CARES Act and the changes that have been made and participants' demands for money is we look at our role as really threefold. And first, what we're trying to do is make sure they understand and have all the necessary information. The act has been out now for, 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks. And we had a little bit of advance notice as to what it was going to contain, and we were actively researching and figuring that out. But we quickly made some decisions as to how this is going to impact our clients, and we've provided that information to them. The pace of content, if you will, that my team has produced has just been phenomenal, and they've been great at getting that kind of information out. But secondly, and I think a little bit more importantly, is we need to help our clients understand what their needs are. Unfortunately, crises like these tend to produce short-term thinking. And sometimes they start reacting as to what they want as opposed to what they need. And I usually joke a little bit about this. Anybody who's a parent knows there's a difference between a want and a need. Right. We need to think in terms of what's actually needed here in this scenario versus what the clamor of what is wanted, maybe from your participants as well. And then third, what we try to do is we help them implement what's necessary so that they can achieve their goal, both short-term and long-term. If anybody's heard me speak over the years, you will note that I always harp on the fact that, retirement plans are not just, I have to have a retirement plan. You need to understand why you have a retirement plan. What's the goal? What's the objective? And why is it that you're going through what you're going through in order to maintain this retirement plan? So make sure you understand both the short-term and the long-term kinds of things. Just as an aside, and you did ask this in this question, I'm not going to count the number of decades that we've been talking in the industry about the need to have an emergency fund. Right. The industry is talking about maybe 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses set aside in some sort of safe vehicle, a savings account, or whatever it may be. And I think this kind of crisis now, and this is the second economic crisis we've had in the last 10 or 12 years, should really drive home the need for having that emergency fund. I know in the last couple of years, the industry has been talking about ways in which we can help facilitate that, and ways in which employers might assist their employees in setting up emergency funds, either through a payroll deduct or maybe even setting up something alongside or inside the 401k plan. But I think we need to make sure that we keep that in mind. Hopefully a number of people these days have had that emergency fund set up so that they at least have some funds with which to deal with right now. The retirement plan is not an emergency fund. A retirement plan by definition and by design is really for long-term goals. And that's getting people to and through retirement. And we really have to focus on that with the understanding that right now people are hurting. I mean, there are some people that are in some serious financial problems right now. And they do need some money. And unfortunately, because the retirement plan is usually the most visible and sometimes the largest pool of money available, that's where they look, and that's what Congress did. They enacted the CARES Act, which provides some greater access to those kinds of funds. Unfortunately, and I'm just going to throw this out here, that it's not always best that you look to that for your easy money, and the reason for that is because at times of economic turmoil, including this one, oftentimes the market goes down. It's been bouncing around and up lately, but if the market goes down and you're looking at it, you're going to actually be selling out of your investments in the retirement plan at lows. And that's very hard to recoup when the market bounces back. You're going to lose any of that future appreciation. So keep in mind what the long-term goals of the retirement plan are when you start thinking about how you implement these kinds of things. I will tell you just from experience that we know that a good portion of loans that are taken out from the plan are never repaid. They go into default. From our experience as well, that when we've had disaster distributions and hardships because of hurricanes and wildfires and things like that, that are theoretically repayable, that very few, if any, people actually repay them. That is a problem we call leakage, and that the money goes away. The government actually studied this at one point in time and found out that 41 cents of every dollar set aside for retirement never makes it to retirement, let alone through retirement. So I think that's a concern that plan committees, plan sponsors, and employers all need to start thinking about, because we don't want to have short-term decisions that are going to affect long-term results. And you have to balance those things. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that we're hoping that this is a short-term, relatively speaking, shorter term than a career and retirement, and that there will be some sort of recovery. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing our clients do that we think are actually very instructive here. The more active committees have gotten together, and they've actually looked at the CARES Act provisions, the loans, the distributions, the loan repayment deferment provisions, and things along the things that are really optional, and have taken a measured approach as to how they do that. I'll give you kind of a case study. It's a rather large manufacturing company, and they're actually in many different states. They have facilities in a number of different states. And like any manufacturing company, large or small, they've got some issues with respect to how they can continue to operate and maintain social distancing. It's hard to do in a factory. They've certainly tried to maintain operations. They still have customer needs and things along those lines that they have to fulfill. But what they're doing is they are implementing a furlough process where they're going to be essentially asking people to stay home. They're not going to be paid. It may be a rolling furlough, so 3 months on, 3 months off, or something along those lines, or go through the organization so that they kind of share the approach that they're taking. And they are very concerned about what their employees are going to be experiencing during this period of time. So they've actually looked at what are the other sources of funds that these people have that they can utilize apart from taking the money out of their retirement plan, knowing full well that a good portion of that money will never make it to retirement. They went state by state and figured out what the unemployment benefits are going to be for the employees who are in that state. They added to that amount $600 that the federal government's going to kick in per week, at least for a period of time. I think it's 6 months that that's been funded. You add those two together, and approximately on average, their employees are going to get $1,000 a week. So that's not bad. The average household income in this country is $52,029 a year. So these people are going to get just about the average household income in unemployment. Now that's short term. They're not going to get it for the full year. It's going to be for a period of time. But that's a pretty good replacement of what they were making while they were employed. They're also looking at what they can do to help their employees save some money. So they have implemented the loan payment deferment part of the CARES Act so that those employees who had loans can at least suspend those loans for a period of time. Interest will still accrue and all of that. I know you've covered this previously, but they took that measured approach because that is a reduction in expenses. Now this company is being very generous, and they're taking an approach that they're actually going to continue to cover the healthcare costs and benefits for these employees. I know not everybody can do that, but that is something that they factored into their equation. And then they started looking at, well, now do we need to implement the COVID-19 loan provisions and let people take up to 100% of their account balance or $100,000, or a COVID-19 disbursement where they can take $100,000, got some special tax benefits, it's theoretically repayable. And they've come to the conclusion that not right now, maybe later, depending upon how things go. But they're looking at it from the perspective of there's going to be some pain, but there will also be some long-term pain if they allow the kind of leakage from the plan that we know will happen if they implement these provisions. They are currently talking about whether or not they can implement a loan provision, but it's not going to be 100% of your account balance or $100,000. It'll be a maximum of maybe $25,000. So they're looking at it from let's satisfy the participants' need and not just give them a windfall of theoretically 2 years of the average household income in this country.
Well, Michael, let me interrupt you right there, because you're bringing up some very good points. And the point is that don't you feel that given this crisis that this has put more emphasis on financial wellness overall? I mean, don't you feel it's important for the employers and plan sponsors today to maybe think about more education for employees, helping them with student loans, perhaps having emergency funds set up, having HSAs, other things outside of the retirement plan that employees can be educated on, and then at a time of crisis, they can go to those sources first rather than having to go into the retirement plan, because you said this is a long-term goal. So I think bringing all these various educational tools and alternatives, I think might be a good alternative, especially considering, Michael, as you said, this is only a short-term fix. So in the long term, I think more emphasis on financial wellness is something we should all be looking at. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think you took the words out of my mouth, but I'm going to add to that. I mean, we don't need to look at this as, okay, well, we should have implemented financial wellness and everything would be fine today. Absolutely emphasize it going forward if you haven't implemented those kinds of provisions. But I would also add that it's not too late in the current environment. I can tell you that there is a great demand from our clients for some educational materials that have been updated on a number of different things that are current, if you will. Everything from market volatility and how to deal with that to discussions about the impact of the loan, the impact of the disbursement, and the long-term kinds of consequences. The manufacturing firm that I've been talking about actually developed their own FAQs. We help them with that. And every time an employee is about to be furloughed as part of their process here, downsizing on a temporary basis, they are actually giving those FAQs to the participant, which gives that participant information about the resources available to them, what the consequences are of the retirement plan, what the company is doing. And they have that prepared in advance in order to make sure their employees have all of the answers that they need and can weather the storm, if you will, going forward. So financial wellness is absolutely the ultimate solution, but it's both long-term, and hopefully people will be doing this overall, but you can also implement those principles at this point in time.
Absolutely.
And I think that the bottom line here is that, and this is the approach we are taking, and what my team and all of our associates at One America are doing with our clients, is to make sure they understand that this isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not, right. Oh, we're going to implement all these provisions and your clients are going to take all their money and everything's going to be fine. Let's look at it on a measured approach. Let's work with the committee to make sure that they understand those long-term goals, and then let's implement those things that are needed. And as I said earlier, when you asked a question, none of these decisions are cast in concrete. You can implement them over time, you can reverse them, you can change your mind. They do sunset after a certain period of time, but there are other tools too. Don't forget, plans can have regular loans and plans can have regular hardship distributions too. Right. So a lot of the things people will experience, foreclosures, evictions, medical costs perhaps, you can get a hardship for, and that's limited to the amount of the need. So take that approach and deal with it more in a measured approach rather than reactionary.
Right, and it's true, Michael. I think in this time of crisis, we all have to work together. It's a moving target, and I think a lot of times what's happening is some of the record keepers have sort of become, trying to help the process as well. And so let's put up our next poll question, DJ, because this is a question I think all of us should be looking at when we deal with our record keepers, and that is, has your record keeper waived transaction fees on either participant loans or withdrawals? Be interesting to see what your comments are there. And while we're compiling the results, Steph, do you have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. And this is a two-part question. First, with regard to the CARES Act loan provisions, are they restricted to those who've been impacted by COVID-19? And then the second part of that question is, if participants can self-certify, does any documentation need to be obtained from the participant to show they were impacted?
Sherry, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yes. So Steph, read the first part one more time. The first part of the question.
Sure. With regards to the CARES Act loan provisions and what's been changed, do those loosened restrictions apply to only those who have been impacted by COVID-19, or can any participant who has assets be utilized? Can any participant utilize the updated loan limits that have been put in place?
Got it. Yeah, and I think so. So the short answer is anyone, because the thought is that every person is impacted by COVID-19. So there isn't a specific eligibility, if you will, or criteria related to COVID-19. Similar, and maybe because they're asking this question, the Families First Act has qualifying events or reasons, not to my knowledge, but I will just turn it over to either Ty or Michael, my colleagues on the panel, to talk about whether or not there are requirements in terms of the request or proof that they need it. I don't know the answer to that.
Right. Ty, why don't you take that, because there are specific individuals that this was intended for and the self-certification, but we'll let you comment on that, Ty, because there are restrictions and there are self-certification process. Ty?
Yeah. I think, with each record keeper is going to be, a little bit different. And it's interesting to see how each record keeper is handling the situation. But you're right. Participants do need to self-certify, and depending on the record keeper, they're going to require, some sort of documentation from these individuals to show that they have been impacted in some way. And so, yeah, and Sheree, my understanding too is that the loan provision, if implemented at the plan sponsor level, would also be available to those folks that are being impacted from a financial standpoint. So one thing I'm not clear on is whether or not that they, as from a loan versus a distribution, if they would actually need to provide any documentation. I think that's a decision made by each record keeper. But I would defer to Michael maybe on that, specifically on how you guys are handling it.
Yeah, there are specific rules around it. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, well, I mean, both the loans and the disbursements are available to what the Act defines as a qualified individual.
Right.
And I'm not going to go into the details, but it is those people who have been impacted, and it gives you a list. And it also says the Secretary of the Treasury can come up with other criteria. They haven't yet. But it's basically reduction of hours, layoffs, things along those lines. In terms of the self-certification, we've taken the position that a self-certification is all that is needed. The Act specifically says that they can self-certify and that we can rely on that. So we have redesigned our forms to allow participants to self-certify. And I would add that we don't ask them which of the provisions or which of the criteria they meet. We just say, here are the criteria, and the certification is, I hereby certify that I meet one or more of those criteria to be a qualified individual. We don't think we should be asking questions about which they meet, because there are privacy concerns. There may even be HIPAA concerns involved in asking for that, and the Act says we can rely on it, so we're going to rely on it.
Absolutely. I mean, basically, it applies to people who are actually suffering through the COVID-19, their spouse, and also people who have unforeseen financial consequences. But in terms of working with record keepers, let's throw up the results to the last poll, if you would, DJ. Okay, and this is interesting. And again, it really depends on the record keeper, and rather than us belaboring the point, talk to your record keeper. They can tell you what their position is on it. But I think it's important that, as I said, we all work together in this crisis. Now, Ty, as a retirement plan advisor, and part of your responsibility is to effectively communicate with plan sponsors and participants. We know you're good at that, as evidenced by the recognition and awards that you have received over the previous 25 years. Much of your experience has been earned when working with the Fortune 1000 firms and helping retirement plan committees to make the possible decisions on driving the retirement plan success. As a member of your firm's executive committee and as the leader of the retirement plan advisory practice at your firm, you are in touch with retirement plan committees and their thinking, and also how they react in times of crisis. So my question for you, Ty, is how do you effectively communicate with plan sponsors and plan participants who have experienced both bear market and bull market within this span of about 90 days?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. I mean, it's interesting hearing Sheree talk about communications, and I kind of put plan sponsors and plan participants into separate camps in that plan sponsors, I think we definitely have been overly communicative to during this time, just to make sure they're aware of what's going on in the markets. And our recommendation for plan participants has, however you normally communicate with them, whether it's the record keeper or if you have a financial wellness provider, or if you do it through HR, whatever the normal course would have been, is how you should continue to communicate with them. Sometimes I think communicating in a special way may raise red flags, increase anxiety, and so forth. So I think there's a little bit of difference. But going back to your point about the bear and bull market, one thing retirement plan committees haven't seen in a while is volatility. I mean, we're coming off the longest bull market in the history of the stock market. So it's been pretty interesting to see. But at the end of the day, going back to just thinking about as a fiduciary to a retirement plan, is that we're in this for the long haul, and so it's having a calm voice and staying the course is really what we're talking with our retirement plan committees about. If you look at this market, it's been the fastest peak to trough we've ever seen, at about 34% down from top to bottom. But yet, we've also had one of the largest post World War II rebounds in the history of the market at plus 25%. And so, staying the course is important because I think we've all seen these charts before that, hey, if you try to time the market and you miss the 10 best days, it could really materially impact your retirement plan. And in fact, most of the best days actually occur within a week or two of the worst days. And we have seen that in this market. So communicating to the retirement plan committees of, staying the course that, hey, we've built a very good menu of investment choices here. Another point that I'm kind of looking at is looking back to 2008 as evidence as the most recent, major crisis that we've seen, and seeing what actually participants did then. We had about 85% of participants actually did nothing and stayed the course. Of the people who did make changes, you can kind of divide that down or dig into that a little bit further. And it's interesting to see people who were in target date funds versus people who were creating their own asset allocations. What we've seen through various surveys and so forth is that people who were in target date funds were half as likely to make, knee-jerk reactions to their account. So I think that's also, something to point out here.
Right. And, when you're dealing with time plan committees right now, what are their biggest concerns going into the second quarter, having come out of this sort of bear bull type of market?
Yeah, I think they're curious to see what's going on with their participants. Have they, what kind of transactions have they been, doing? Have they made any changes? Certainly, those are some statistics that we're going to have ready and available as we start having our normal quarterly investment, our retirement plan committee meetings. They're going to be looking at those. I think for those folks who also maybe were on the fence about, should we maybe do, an investment re-enrollment, looking at some of the stats around how participants react when they're in well-diversified portfolios versus not, also maybe heightened as they look at this in the next coming quarters. So I think we'll see some additional activity around that, maybe not in 2020, but heading into 2021.
That's great. So what would you say the plan sponsors and the committee should be doing right now?
I think it's staying the course.
Yep.
Don't overreact, and don't do things outside of the normal course that you normally would have done to raise additional concerns to participants. I mean, again, rely on the communication pieces that your record keepers are using or your financial wellness provider. Again, however you normally communicate to participants, do that through those channels, and be available. And when people do come to you to ask, what you should do, I mean, these are the types of things you should be saying that, hey, we expect to see volatility. Yes, this has been a major downturn, but it's a blip, and that, you know, we're here for the long term, and most people are, you know, have, you know, a lot longer than a year to retirement.
No, that's good. That's good advice. And it's interesting because our next poll question really comes into play when we ask the plan sponsors the following questions to react to. I think you can all see the question. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to fill that out. And in the meantime, Steph, do we have any last questions before we end the program?
We do, and this is a question for Ty, and question is, how will your investment communications change, either in process or substance, as a result of the first quarter?
Yeah, you know, that's I think it's a good point. I think people are probably going to want to know more about, you know, the near term. Like I said before, we've had a very strong market with little volatility, frankly, for a long period of time. And so I think there's probably going to be a little bit more emphasis just on, just be more out of curiosity to say, hey, what exactly happened, you know, in the first quarter? What did it look like? Now that people are seeing the broad-based markets, they're probably now wondering, well, what did our plan do? How did we look? So I think we'll see some of that. So I don't see that we'll change necessarily, you know, anything in particular. I think there'll just be more of a heightened awareness of near-term performance as we see it.
Right. Well, DJ, if we can show the results of our last poll, which I think is very important, what was the primary role of your retirement committee during this crisis? And boy, it's pretty even between communicate with participants, just like you said, Ty, and the others. Adjust plan is needed to support employees and organization. I think that's right on to what you just said, Ty. And I don't know if you have any comments about that, but I think during these times of crisis, communication is the key, and to align any fears that the employees might have. So I think the polls are right on the point. What do you think about that, Ty?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think if you know, I think our philosophy is if you feel like you're communicating just enough, you're probably not communicating enough. If you feel like you're over communicating, it's probably about right. So, you know, again, you know, using the proper channels to do that makes a lot of sense.
Right. And Michael, do you have any last comments specifically about that poll and the reason for communication is heightened during these times of crisis?
Oh, I would agree completely with Ty that you cannot over communicate in these times. You need to be, you know, clear and precise and keep communicating throughout the entire process.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank all three of you today. I want to thank Cherie, I want to thank Michael, and I want to thank Ty for your participation. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you because I think, as I said before, working together is the key. I also want to thank Fred, Steph, and also DJ, who is running our polls and questions. So I want to thank all of them. And don't forget that for those of you who want to stay on this call in order to get that 1 hour of credit, please do so. And let's wait for 1 minute. And then after that, we'll give you a code, which is necessary for you to get your credit. Now, if you have any other questions or comments that you'd like to make, please contact us at virtualtownhall@tpsuniversity.com. And also, there will be a replay made available and sent along with the information about next week's TPSU Virtual Town Hall. And also, the replay of this call will be available on 401k TV starting on Monday. So from my perspective as the host of the show, I really appreciate your time and your concerns. And we look forward to dealing with you on another of our upcoming virtual town halls. So that is the end of this program. Again, stay tuned for 1 minute if you wish to get those credits. I hope all of your families stay safe and healthy, and we wish you a wonderful day.
Staff, are you on the line?
Yeah.
Okay, whenever you're ready then.
We're at 30 seconds, so I will be giving the codes in another 30 seconds.
And we appreciate your patience.
Those of you who are members of SHRM understand that there is an activity name, an activity ID, a date and a time, and the form of delivery. So I will go through this 2 times just to make sure anybody has the ability to take it down. The activity name is T as in Tom, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, U as in University, Virtual Town Hall. That's TPSU, Virtual Town Hall. The activity ID is 20-K as in Kilo, V as in Victor, Z as in Zebra, the number 6, and E as in Echo. 20-KVZ6E. The date and time is 4/17/2020. The time is 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And the delivery method is video conference and webcast. And I will repeat that one more time. The activity name is TPSU Virtual Town Hall. The activity ID is 20-K as in Kilo, V as in Victor, Z as in Zebra, the number 6, E as in Echo. And the time is, or the date, I'm sorry, the date is 4/17/2020. And the time is 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And the delivery method is video conferences and webcast. So that concludes our program for the day. And if you have any questions, you can certainly shoot a note to us at the address on the screen, virtualtownhall@tpsuniversity.com. Thank you.